The evening sun hung low over the dusty land, painting the ridges of the desert in copper light. Dying wind carried the smell of gunpowder and dry sage across the open plain. Buzzards circled above, waiting for silence to settle after the gunfire that had shaken the lonely stretch between the canyon and the river. A man lay there, half buried in dust, his hat a few feet from him, his chest rising slow, as if each breath might be his last. His horse was gone, his rifle broken, and the trail of blood behind him told a story that was almost over. Almost. From beyond the ridge came the soft drumming of hooves, steady, measured, deliberate. The sound didn't belong to a posse or a wagon team. It was a single rider, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned the land by heart. The figure emerged from the heat shimmer on Apache woman, wrapped in a faded blanket of red and brown, her dark hair braided and her eyes watchful as a hawk's, her gaze fixed on the man in the dust. He wasn't just another stranger lost to the land. She knew that look of stubborn defiance in his eyes, even through the pain. He was a cowboy hurt, maybe dying, but still fighting the way men like him always did. She pulled her horse to a stop beside him and sat still for a moment. "You're still breathing," she said quietly, her English marked with the rhythm of her people's tongue. The cowboy's lips moved, but no sound came. His hand twitched toward the revolver that lay near his boot, though his strength had already gone. The woman slid down from her horse and crouched beside him, her fingers brushing the dirt away from his cheek. His face was streaked with sweat and blood. "You've lost too much," she said, her tone neither cruel nor kind. "If you stay here, the night will finish what the bullets started." The man tried to speak again, his voice barely a whisper. "Go, leave me." She looked at him, then at the horizon where the sun was slipping behind the cliffs. The coyotes would be out soon, and the cold would follow. She could have left him there. No one would have blamed her. He was one of the white men who had taken from her people, who had hunted and fenced and built towns where the wind used to run free. Yet something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't fear. It was pride and loneliness. She stood and pulled her horse closer. "Get on my horse, handsome cowboy," she said, the faintest edge of mockery softening into something almost tender. "If you die with me watching." He blinked, dazed, unsure if he'd heard her right. Then her hands were under his shoulders, strong and sure, lifting him with more strength than he'd guessed she had. He groaned but didn't fight her. Together, they stumbled toward the horse, the fading sun turning their shadows long against the ground. When she helped him into the saddle, his head fell forward against her shoulder, the smell of blood and dust heavy between them. She led the horse through the twilight down a narrow path that wound between rock and sage. The cowboy's breathing was ragged, sometimes stopping long enough that she thought he might be gone, but then it came back, slow and stubborn. The land around them changed color as night fell, the red earth turning gray under the rising moon. She stopped at a dry creek bed, where a few cottonwoods stood crooked and tired. There she eased him down and built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke thin. As she cleaned the wound on his shoulder with a cloth dipped in cool water, his eyes flickered open again. "Why are you helping me?" he asked weakly. She didn't answer at first. The firelight flickered across her face, making her look both young and ancient. "Maybe because you're too foolish to know when to quit," she said finally. "Or maybe because no one should die alone under the same stars we all share." He tried to smile but couldn't. The pain cut through him like a knife. She noticed the way his hand trembled when he reached for the canteen she offered, and she steadied it for him. In the silence that followed, they listened to the far-off call of a coyote and the crackle of the fire. "You fought them?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Bandits. Took the herd. Shot my horse." He coughed, his voice breaking. "Didn't plan to end up here." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Men always think they can plan what the land will allow." She leaned back, staring into the fire. "This land doesn't care who bleeds on it. Apache, cowboy, outlaws, all the same to the sand." He looked at her then, really looked. There was sorrow in her words, but also strength. It was not someone who waited for the world to be kind. She met it on her own terms. The wind shifted, carrying a distant sound, the faint clatter of hooves, many of them. She froze, head tilted, eyes narrowing. "They're coming," she said, almost to herself. "Who?" he asked. "Men who don't finish their killing right," she said, rising to her feet and throwing dirt over the fire until the flames died. The darkness swallowed them whole. He tried to move, but pain dragged him down. She grabbed her rifle and crouched low beside him. The sound grew louder. 5, maybe 6 riders moving fast through the dark. They weren't bandits from her tribe. Their voices carried English curses through the night. "You're wanted," she murmured. "They're tracking you." He didn't deny it. His breath came short. "They'll kill you too if you stay." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "They've tried before." For a long moment, neither moved. Then she took his revolver from where it lay beside him and checked the chamber. 2 bullets left. She slipped it back into his hand. "They find us, you shoot only when you see the whites of their eyes," she whispered. He nodded, his fingers curling around the gun. She crawled a few paces forward, blending into the shadows, her rifle steady, her eyes fixed on the edge of the brush, where the riders' lanterns began to glow faintly through the trees. The light bobbed and swayed like fireflies in the distance. The cowboy's pulse hammered in his ears. He could taste dust and blood. He wanted to call out, to tell her to leave, but his voice wouldn't come. The sound of hooves drew closer until he could hear the creak of saddles and the snort of horses. The Apache woman glanced back at him once. For that instant, their eyes met in the dim light, the wounded cowboy and the woman who refused to let him die. In that look was something unspoken, an understanding older than the land itself. She turned back, finger tight on the trigger. The first rider appeared through the darkness, a tall shadow against the moonlit brush. Then another and another. The woman's breath slowed. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the earth beneath her. The cowboy shifted slightly, the revolver shaking in his hand. He felt her stillness like a current in the air. He didn't know her name, didn't know what drove her to stay, but he knew she was the only reason he was still breathing. The riders drew nearer. A voice called out sharp, mocking, "We know. You're out there, cowboy. You and your Indian whore." Laughter followed, cruel and loud. The woman's jaw tightened. Her finger curled on the trigger, but she waited. Always wait for the right moment. The cowboy's hand twitched toward her as if to stop her, but it was too late. The gunfire that followed split the night apart. The horses screamed. The land that had gone quiet after sunset came alive again with the sound of vengeance and survival. When the smoke cleared, the moon hung low, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy tried to lift his head, but all he could see was her silhouette standing over him. Rifle still smoking, her eyes locked on something beyond the ridge. She looked back at him once, her voice low and fierce. "We're not done yet." And before he could ask what she meant, the echo of new hooves rose from the distance, closer this time, faster and not friendly. The night was far from over. The sound of the second wave of riders carried through the canyon like thunder. The Apache woman's horse stamped nervously, ears flicking toward the distant echoes. She stood still, her hand firm on the reins, her rifle pointed toward the horizon. The wounded cowboy leaned against a rock, his face pale but his eyes open now, more alive than he had any right to be. The night pressed in close around them. Every gust of wind seemed to carry danger. "They're not the same men," she said quietly. "Different ones this time. Heavier horses. Maybe soldiers." The cowboy tried to lift his head, wincing. "Soldiers wouldn't chase through here at night. They'd wait for morning." She shook her head. "Not if they're hunting you. Or me." Her voice was calm, but the words carried a shadow of old pain. She turned, scanning the trail behind them. The moonlight glowed faintly across the dry brush, painting everything in pale silver. Far off, the faint flicker of a lantern moved like a restless ghost between the rocks. Whoever they were good trackers. The desert didn't give up secrets easily, but it never lied either. The Apache woman knew how to read its stories, the broken stone, the crushed weed, the rhythm of hooves on dirt. She led the horse into the shadows of a narrow pass and gestured for the cowboy to follow. But he stumbled, his legs barely holding him. Without a word, she looped her arm under his and half-dragged him along. Her movements quick but quiet, they climbed higher, the land tilting upward until they reached a ledge overlooking the canyon. From there, she could see the flickering lights of the riders below, weaving like snakes through the desert floor. The cowboy slumped against a boulder, breathing hard. His shirt was soaked with blood again. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve and pressed it against the wound, ignoring his muttered protests. "You talk too much," she said softly. "Save your breath." He gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "You sound like someone who's used to giving orders." She didn't answer, just tightened the bandage. For a moment, the only sounds were the whisper of wind and the distant creak of leather saddles below. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "My father led warriors through this land when I was a child. We fought men who built fences, who called our home empty. He said the earth remembers everyone who walks at every step, every wound."
Ow!
The cowboy watched her face in the moonlight. "And what did it remember about him?" She paused, her hand still. "That he never bent his knee to anyone," she said. "Even when the bullets found him, he looked away, ashamed of his own weakness." "Then you should have left me down there," he muttered. "I don't deserve your help." She gave a small shrug. "Maybe not. But death doesn't ask who deserves what." Down below, the riders had stopped. A voice shouted orders, and the group split into two directions. She cursed under her breath and turned toward the path leading deeper into the cliffs. "We move now," she said. The cowboy tried to stand, but faltered again. She caught him by the arm, steadying him. "You fall, I'll drag you," she said flatly. "But we don't stay here." They moved slowly through the narrow rock passage, the moonlight fading as the cliffs closed in around them. The air grew cooler, the scent of wild sage stronger. Somewhere ahead, water trickled faint, lay a spring hidden among the stones. The Apache woman stopped there and knelt, letting her horse drink before filling a small gourd. She passed it to the cowboy, who took it with trembling hands. He drank greedily, then wiped his mouth. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked at him a long time before answering. "Names are for those who still belong somewhere," she said. "I left mine behind when they burned our village." The cowboy lowered his eyes. "I didn't come here to take from anyone," he said quietly. "I was driving cattle west. They attacked us near the river. I fought back." "Men always have reasons," she replied. "So did the ones who came for us. Their reasons were written on paper, sealed by someone who never saw the land he took." He had no answer to that. The truth stung more than any wound. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the whisper of water and the faint creak of the horse's saddle at last. She stood and glanced toward the north. "There's a cave to ridges over. We can hide until morning. If we live through the night," they set out again, climbing over uneven rock. The cowboy stumbled more than once, and each time she caught him, her grip firm, her eyes always scanning the darkness. He realized she wasn't just saving him out of pity, she was surviving alongside him, tied to his fate by some unspoken thread neither could cut. By the time they reached the cave, the first light of dawn had begun to wash the sky with gray. She led him inside and set him down near the back where the shadows were deepest. The walls smelled of dust and old fire. Someone had used this place before charred wood, a few bones. A scrap of cloth half buried in sand. She started a small fire again, careful to keep it hidden from the cave's mouth. The cowboy's eyes half closed as warmth crept back into his body. "You ever think about leaving this land?" he asked. She shook her head. "Where would I go? This land is my mother. Even if she's been wounded, she's still mine." He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who still believes there's something worth saving." "There is," she said, her eyes distant. "But it won't be saved by guns or laws. Maybe only by memory." Outside, the sound of the riders had faded for now, but she didn't trust the silence. The desert had many faces, and one of them was deception. She rose to check the trail from the cave's entrance and froze. In the distance, where the dawn light met the horizon, dust was rising again. "They found the trail," she whispered. "How far?" the cowboy asked, struggling to sit up. "Close enough to smell the fire if we stay," she said. "They'll reach us before midday." He looked toward his revolver, still lying near his saddlebag. "We could fight," he said. "You could try," she answered. "But there are too many." You wouldn't last. Then run, he said firmly. Take your horse and go. She turned to him, her eyes sharp. I told you before, cowboy, don't leave anyone to die alone. He stared at her, uncertain whether to argue or thank her. But before he could speak, the sound of a single shot cracked through the morning air. It wasn't close, but it was enough. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. The Apache woman snuffed the fire with her boot and pulled him deeper into the shadows. They're marking distance, she whispered. Testing echoes. They know we're near. The cowboy gritted his teeth, forcing himself to sit up straighter. You got a plan? She nodded slowly. If they come from the south, we circle north through the ravine. There's a dry wash that leads to the old riverbed. But if they've split their men, then we're trapped, he finished for her. The moment hung heavy between them. The morning light crept closer to the cave entrance, a thin gold line crawling across the stone. She glanced at him against this beaten, stubborn man who had no reason to trust her, and yet somehow had. Something unspoken passed between them, quiet as breath. She turned to her horse and checked the rifle again. You can still ride? He nodded, though the pain in his eyes betrayed him. Long enough, he said. Then we ride until the land decides which one of us it wants, she replied. They stepped out into the pale dawn, the desert wide and empty before them. In the distance, a thin column of dust twisted upward where the riders were closing in. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of the coming heat and something else, fear. Or maybe fate. The Apache woman mounted first and reached down a hand toward him. Come on, handsome cowboy, she said quietly, echoing her own words from the night before. The sun's not waiting for either of us. Took her hand, hauled himself into the saddle, and together they turned toward the north. Behind them, the sound of hooves grew louder again, the chase far from over as the horse plunged forward across the open plain. The rising sun burned the horizon red, and the world seemed to hold its breath once more. The land had claimed many before them, and before the day was done, it might claim them too. But for now, the cowboy and the Apache woman rode as two souls, bound by the same ruthless sky. Running not from death, but toward whatever waited just beyond the next ridge. The desert stretched out before them like a furnace of light. The sun climbing higher, turning the land into a shimmering sea of heat. Dust clung to their faces, to the horse's mane, to every breath they took. The Apache woman rode ahead, her posture straight, her braid whipping against her back in the wind. The cowboy followed, barely hanging on, the pain in his shoulder burning with every jolt. Yet he didn't complain. There was something in her presence that refused pity, something fierce and alive that made him want to hold on a little longer. Behind them, faint as a heartbeat, came the echo of pursuit. The riders hadn't given up. Sometimes the wind carried the metallic jingle of bridles, the faint shouts of men calling to each other. They were tracking them by instinct and by anger. The cowboy knew the kind. He'd ridden with men like them once, men who chased for blood. Not just as they reached a rocky slope by midday. Where the land dropped into a dry basin filled with thorn brush and brittle bones of cattle that had died in the last drought, the Apache woman slowed her horse and looked across the empty plain. The air shimmered, blurring the distance. Nothing moved, yet she didn't trust the silence. The desert often looked empty before it swallowed you whole. We stop here, she said quietly. The horse needs rest. The cowboy dismounted, his legs unsteady. He leaned against a rock, eyes scanning the horizon. You think they'll find us? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched near the horse's hooves and brushed away the tracks with a piece of dry mesquite branch. They'll try, she said finally. But the desert hides what it chooses. Maybe today it hides us. He watched her work, admiring the calm in her movements. She wasn't nervous, wasn't rushing. Every gesture had purpose. He realized she'd grown up reading this land like scripture each. Rock and shadow telling a story only she understood. You've done this before, he said. She looked at him briefly, her eyes glinting in the sunlight. Run or hide? Both. Her lips curved slightly. Too many times? She turned her gaze back toward the horizon. You? He shrugged. Long enough to know running never lasts. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint smell of smokewood smoke, dry and sharp. She stiffened, her hand going to her rifle. The cowboy smelled it too and felt his stomach tighten. Someone had lit a fire nearby, and it wasn't theirs. They're close, he said. She nodded. Closer than I hoped. They moved quickly into the basin, weaving between boulders and brittle shrubs. The heat shimmered around them, and the air seemed to hum. She found a narrow cleft in the rocks and guided the horse into it, hidden from plain sight. The space was tight but shaded, a rare mercy in the blazing noon, as they settled in. The cowboy looked around and noticed signs that others had used the place before. Broken arrowhead buried in the dirt. A blackened patch from an old fire. This place means something to you, he said. Her eyes softened. It was where my brother hid when the soldiers came. I was 12. He went out one night to draw them away and never came back. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. She stared at the rock wall, her jaw tightening. Sorry doesn't change the dust that covers the dead. He didn't speak again for a while. The heat pressed in, and time seemed to stretch thin. Outside, the sound of hooves drifted closer, then stopped. The horse stamped nervously, and the Apache woman placed a hand on its neck, whispering something soft in her own language. The sound was like music, close, steady. Ancient voices echoed faintly through the canyon. English, rough, and angry. Check the rocks. The tracks stop here. The cowboy gripped his revolver, feeling sweat trickle down his neck. He could see the flicker of sunlight on rifle barrels moving through the distance. She crouched beside him, her rifle already steady against her shoulder. We wait, she whispered. The tension hung thick as smoke. The men below argued, one of them shouting that the trail split. After a few minutes, the sound of hooves began to fade again, heading south. But neither of them moved until the noise was completely gone. When silence finally returned, the cowboy exhaled slowly. You've saved both our hides again. She shook her head. The land did. We only listened. The long hours of afternoon dragged by. They stayed hidden until the sky began to cool from gold to violet. The cowboy dozed briefly, dreaming of home of open fields and laughter that no longer existed. When he woke, she was sitting outside the crevice, staring west, her rifle resting across her knees. He joined her quietly. You ever think about what peace would look like? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. Peace is a word white men bring with soldiers, she said. It sounds different when spoken by those who survive it. He frowned, unsure how to answer. I didn't come here to hurt your people. I know, she said softly. You came because the land promised something. It always does. As the sun slipped away, painting the sky in shades of fire, they saw the first hints of movement again on the far ridges, small dark figures against the light. The men hadn't gone far after all. They'd circled back. They're learning, she murmured. They know we're not heading south. Then where do we go? He asked. North, she said. Through the Badlands. There's an old mission near the river. If we reach it before dawn, we might find food and maybe a place to stand. Right. He stared at her. You sound like you've been there before. I have, she said, but not as a guest. They broke camp quickly, riding hard as the stars began to pierce the sky. The air cooled, but the chase never felt far behind. The cowboy's wound reopened, bleeding through his shirt again, but he said nothing. Pain had become part of the ride now, as constant as the wind. Hours later, when the moon was high, they reached the edge of the Badlands, a wild stretch of ravines and jagged rock, like the bones of the earth laid bare. The Apache woman slowed her horse and pointed to a distant shapa, stone building half buried in the sand, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The mission, she said. It's not safe, but it's shelter. As they approached, the cowboy could see the faded cross still standing crooked on the roof. The place was silent, except for the wind whistling through the broken windows. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The walls were covered in old Spanish words carved deep into the plaster. This used to be a church? he asked quietly. Once, she said. Then a prison. Then nothing. They found an old bench to rest on, the wood worn smooth by time. The cowboy leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Strange, he murmured. A place meant for salvation feels like a tomb. The Apache woman walked to the far wall, where a candle stub still sat in an iron holder. She lit it with flint, and the faint flame cast long shadows. Places remember what happens to them, she said. Same as people. The cowboy opened his eyes, the light flickering across his face. And what do you remember? She didn't answer right away. Too much, she said finally, but not enough to forgive. The wind outside grew stronger, whistling through the gaps in the roof. The horse stamped nervously again, ears twitching. She turned toward the door, her instincts sharp. Then, from somewhere in the dark, came the distant creak of leather and the faint sound of footsteps crunching gravel. The cowboy's hand went to his gun. She blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. The air turned cold and heavy. Voices floated in from outside. Closer now. They came through here, one said. Tracks lead straight to the chapel. The cowboy's heart pounded. He could see her eyes faintly glowing in the moonlight through the doorway. You still think the land will hide us? He whispered. Her voice was calm, steady. No, not tonight. The first boot stepped into the doorway, a silhouette framed by the pale glow of the desert moon. The Apache woman moved like a shadow, swift and silent, pulling the cowboy down behind the altar. He could feel her breath near his ear, her whisper no louder than the rustle of cloth. They'll search. Stay low. He nodded, gripping the revolver tight, listening to every step echo through the ruined church. Dust drifted from the rafters with each creak of the floorboards. Another man entered, then another. They were talking softly, their lantern lights sweeping across the broken benches. The cowboy's heart raced. He thought of home again, of a life that seemed so far away. But beside him, the Apache woman was still and sure, her focus unbroken. She looked more like the spirit of the land than flesh and blood, something born from dust and defiance. One of the men kicked over a fallen pew, cursing under his breath. Another voice called from outside, "Find them before the sun comes up." The Apache woman's hand brushed his arm, signaling him to wait. She was counting their steps, listening for distance. Her patience was terrifying. The cowboy wanted to run, to shoot, to do anything but wait. But he followed her lead, trusting the quiet strength that had saved them again and again. Then, just as one of the lanterns turned toward their hiding place, a sudden crash came from outside the horse, startled, breaking free. The men shouted, scattering in confusion. The Apache woman's eyes flashed. Now, she hissed. They slipped through a side passage, moving fast into the night while the chaos erupted behind them. The cowboy stumbled once, clutching his wound, but she pulled him along. The stars above burned cold and bright, and somewhere behind them the shouts turned to gunfire. They didn't look back. The desert was wide, and the night was theirs for now. But the chase was far from over, and both of them knew it. The land had given them another chance, but the dawn would bring new dangers. Neither could yet escape. The night wind tore across the desert like a living thing, carrying the echo of gunfire far into the dark. The Apache woman and the cowboy ran through the dry wash behind the mission, their shadows slipping over the stones as the last echo faded into silence. The stars above were sharp and cold, and the moon hung low, lighting their path just enough to keep them moving. The cowboy's breathing grew ragged, each step a fight against the pain in his side. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on, but every time he faltered, her hand was there steady, fierce, refusing to let him fall. Behind them, shouts rang out again. The men had regrouped, and their lanterns flickered like ghostly eyes along the ridge. The Apache woman turned, raised her rifle, and fired once. The sound cracked the air like thunder. A distant figure fell, the others ducking into the shadows. She didn't wait to see the result. "Keep moving," she said. "They'll follow the sound." The cowboy stumbled, his boots catching on a root. He leaned against a rock, gasping. "How many?" "Too many," she said, scanning the darkness. "But they're tired." They don't know this land like I do. That's our edge. He managed a weak grin. You talk like you're not tired. I'm alive, she said, eyes sharp. That's enough. They moved again, pushing through the rocky terrain until the ground began to slope upward. The air grew cooler, and the sound of running water reached them, a thin trickle from a hidden spring among the rocks. She guided him there, crouching beside the stream, her hand brushing through the cold water. Drink, she said. He knelt beside her, drinking deep. The water tasted like life itself. His reflection wavered in the moonlight beside hers, two faces carved from different worlds, brought together by something neither could explain. Why do you care if I live? He asked quietly. She didn't look at him. Because death already takes enough from me, she said. I won't let it take you too. Before he could answer, the wind shifted. The faint sound of hooves drifted down the slope. She froze, every muscle tense. They found the trail again, she whispered. We go higher. The climb was steep, the rocks loose underfoot. The horse struggled, snorting in fear. The cowboy slipped twice, his visions swimming, but she refused to stop. The ridge above them rose like a wall of shadow, and at its peak, the land opened wide to the plains beyond, a stretch of moonlit desert that looked endless. But between them and that open land was a narrow pass, and waiting at the far end of that pass were torches, dozens of them. She cursed softly. They circled ahead. The cowboy's hand went to his revolver, but she shook her head. You'll waste the bullets. She scanned the cliffs around them, her eyes searching for another way. There was none. The canyon walls rose too steeply to climb. They have us boxed in, he said. Her voice was low, calm. Not yet. She dismounted, handed him the reins, and moved toward the edge of the ridge, where the shadows grew deepest. From her saddlebag she pulled a small pouch, the kind carried by her people for hunting. She scattered something into the wind-fine dust that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. What's that? He asked. Smoke root, she said. It burns fast. Creates cover. She struck a spark, and within seconds the dust caught fire. A swirl of white smoke rose, twisting through the night. It wasn't thick enough to choke, but it blurred their shapes, hiding them from sight. Ride when I say, she whispered. He hesitated. What about you? I'll be right behind you. The smoke spread wider. Below, the torches began to flicker, the men shouting in confusion. Then she slapped the horse hard on the flank. Go. The horse lunged forward, carrying the cowboy into the haze. He ducked low as bullets whined past his ears, sparks flying off the rocks. He couldn't see her, couldn't tell if she followed. Only the sound of chaos behind him, the shouts, the screams, the answering crack of her rifle. He rode through the pass, heart pounding, until the land opened again and the desert swallowed him. He pulled the reins and turned, gasping, trying to see through the smoke. A single figure burst out behind him, the Apache woman, galloping hard, her hair flying loose, her eyes fierce as fire. Behind her, the smoke glowed orange, lit by torches dropped in panic when she reached him. She pulled her horse beside his and didn't slow down. Don't look back, she said. They'll follow the fire. The desert stretched before them again, endless and silent, but the peace didn't last. From the north, the distant rumble of hooves began once more. More riders, maybe a different group. It seemed the whole land had turned against them by dawn. They had reached the old salt flats, a barren, white plain that shimmered under the first light of morning. The air was dry and sharp, every breath scraping their throats. The horses were near collapse. She dismounted and let her hand rest on her horse's neck, whispering softly. We stop here, she said. The cowboy slid off his horse, nearly falling. His wound had reopened again, blood staining his shirt dark. She tore another strip from her sleeve and bound it tight, her movements quick but gentle. You'll bleed out if you keep this up, she said. He tried to smile. If I stop, they'll catch us. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something raw. You think I fear them? No, but I won't let them take you alive. He met her gaze, seeing the truth in it. She wasn't bluffing. She'd fight until the land itself ran dry. For a while, neither spoke. The wind blew across the flats, stirring tiny swirls of dust. Then, faintly, came the sound again, hoofbeats, slow but steady. The riders were coming from both sides now. They were surrounded again, only this time there was nowhere left to run. She raised her rifle and checked the chamber. 2 shots left, she said. How many do you have? He looked at his revolver. 1. She nodded. Then, we make them count. The cowboy leaned against a boulder, his breath coming slow. The sun was rising fast, burning the horizon red. In the glare, he could see the riders spreading out, forming a line. Dust rose behind them like smoke from a wildfire. They're not bandits, he said quietly. Those are soldiers. She didn't answer, but her expression hardened. Then it's worse than I thought. The lead rider raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. They stopped about 100 yards away, rifles glinting in the morning light. One man rode forward, an officer, by his bearing, his uniform dusty but intact. He stopped short of the salt ridge, his voice carrying easily through the still air. You there? He called. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. The cowboy lifted his head weakly. You know him? She stared at the officer for a long moment. Her jaw tightened. I know his kind. The officer's voice grew sharper. You're wanted for harboring a fugitive and resisting arrest. That man beside you killed 4 of my men near the canyon. Surrender, and you might live. The cowboy looked at her, his face pale. I didn't kill them, he whispered. They shot first. I swear it. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the officer. He doesn't care who shot first, she said softly. He just wants to end it. The officer raised his hand again, signaling his men to prepare. The metallic click of rifles echoed across the flats. The cowboy gripped his revolver, his hand trembling. If this is it, he said, I just want to know why you stayed. She turned to him slowly, her face unreadable. Because you didn't run when you could have, she said. And because I won't let the desert take another life that still has fight in it. The wind rose again, carrying with it the scent of dust and iron. The soldiers spread wider, closing the circle. The officer shouted something the cowboy couldn't hear. She lifted her rifle, her movements calm, deliberate. Get on the horse, she said. He shook his head. You'll be trapped, I said. Get on. Her voice was firm, but her eyes flickered with something softer fear. A.B. or farewell. He obeyed, climbing onto the saddle with what strength he had left. She stayed on foot, stepping out from the rocks, her rifle raised. The officer barked another command. The soldiers raised their guns. For a heartbeat, time froze. The air itself seemed to hold still. Then the Apache woman fired. The first bullet struck the officer's horse, sending it rearing. Chaos exploded across the flats. Gunfire roared. The cowboy's horse bolted, carrying him across the open plain as dust erupted behind him. He turned in the saddle, desperate. Searching for her through the haze, he saw her standing tall amid the smoke, firing again and again until the rifle clicked empty. Then she turned and ran toward him, bullets tearing up the ground around her. The soldiers shouted, firing blindly through the dust. He reached out a hand, shouting her name though he didn't even know it. She leaped for the saddle, caught his arm, and pulled herself up behind him. The horse screamed as another shot rang out, grazing its flank. But it kept running. The wind tore at their faces as they raced across the blinding flats, the shouts fading behind them. The cowboy didn't dare look back, didn't want to see what might be chasing them now, men. Dust or fate itself. The Apache woman held him tightly, her breath hot against his ear. Don't stop, she said, her voice fierce and steady. No matter what you hear, we ride until the land ends, as the rising sun turned the desert white. They rode into it to fugitives, bound by blood, by fate, and by the endless question of who would reach the edge of the world first, the living or the dead. The sound of pursuit still echoed faintly behind them, but it was the sound ahead, the whispering wind, the heartbeat of the earth that held all the promise and all the danger still to come. The horse stumbled more than once as it thundered across the salt flats, its breath ragged, its hooves striking sparks from the hard earth. The cowboy's arms were tight around the reins, the Apache woman clinging behind him, her heartbeat against his back, quick and steady. The gunfire had faded, but neither of them dared to slow. The wind howled around them, lifting sand in great swirling ghosts that hid the world from sight. The sun climbed higher, burning white through the haze. Hours passed before the sound of pursuit finally died away. Only the sound of the wind remained, low and mournful, like a song the desert had sung for 1,000 years. The horse slowed to a walk, then to a trembling stop. Foam streaked its neck, and its legs shook under its own weight. The cowboy slid down first, then helped her dismount. Both stood for a long while, breathing hard, their faces streaked with dust and sweat. He turned to her, his voice hoarse. "They're gone." She looked toward the horizon where the sky met the sand. "No one is gone in this land," she said quietly. "They'll follow again when they find their courage." He managed a faint smile. "Then maybe we just keep riding." She shook her head. "The horse won't last another mile, and neither will you." He didn't argue. His legs barely held him as he sank to the ground, the pain from his wound flaring again. She knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her skirt to clean the blood. The cloth came away red. "It's not deep," she said, though they both knew it was worse than that. He watched her work, his eyes half closed. "Why'd you really stay? You could have left me to die back there." She pressed the cloth tighter against his shoulder. "Because I know what it means to be left behind. My brother. He fought like you. Proud. Foolish. Brave. When he fell, I promised I would never walk away from another who still had breath." Her words hung in the hot air, heavy with meaning. He looked at her then, seeing the strength in her face, the quiet fire that had carried them both through the storm. "You kept your promise," he said softly. She met his gaze for a moment, then looked away. For now, they rested through the worst heat of the day under a rock outcropping, sharing the last of the water. The horse grazed weakly on the brittle scrub that grew between the cracks. When evening came, the light turned gold again, soft and forgiving. For the first time in days, the desert felt almost kind. The cowboy stirred, his body still aching but his mind clearer. "What will you do now?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "I'll head back east," she said finally. "There's a valley beyond the mountains. My mother's people live there still. It's not much, but it's home. And me." He asked, almost afraid of the answer. She smiled faintly. "You free now. No chains, no blood debts. The men who chased Umos won't follow past the flats. You can go where you please." He looked out toward the horizon, the sky deepening into purple. "I don't even know where that is anymore," he said quietly. "I had a ranch once. A woman waiting. Then the war, the fighting, the bad deals. It all turned to dust." She watched him closely. "Then start again," she said. "The land doesn't forget, but it forgives if you learn its ways." He gave a soft laugh, shaking his head. "You sound like someone who's seen too much and still believes there's hope." "Hope," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "is what keeps us walking when the light dies." The words lingered in the air as the sun sank behind the distant cliffs. The desert cooled, shadows stretching long. They built a small fire, careful to keep the flame low. The crackle of wood filled the silence. For a while, neither spoke. When he finally did, his tone was different, quieter, almost uncertain. "You think people like us ever stop running?" She looked into the fire. "No," she said. "But sometimes we find a place worth running toward." He stared at her, the reflection of the flames dancing in his tired eyes. "Maybe this place?" She shook her head gently. "This place belongs to ghosts. It's a road, not a home." The night deepened. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, their cries echoing across the flats. The cowboy lay back on his blanket, staring at the stars. They were brighter here, clearer, like they were watching. "You ever wonder," he murmured, "why people keep fighting over land like this? There's enough sky for everyone." Her voice came soft, steady. "'Cause men forget the sky when their hearts are full of greed." He didn't argue. The truth in her words was too plain to deny. The fire burned low, and his eyes grew heavy. The last thing he remembered before sleep was her silhouette against the stars, strong, still, like part of the land itself. By dawn, the horizon was red again. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the horse snorting softly nearby. The Apache woman sat cross-legged beside the fire, her face turned toward the rising sun. She looked peaceful, almost distant. He pushed himself upright, wincing. "You sleep at all?" she smiled faintly. "Sleep comes later, when the soul's done wandering." He poured a little water over his face, the cold waking him fully. "So this is goodbye," he said. She turned to him, her eyes unreadable. "Every journey ends somewhere. The trail doesn't vanish, just changes." He nodded slowly. "If I ever make it back to my land, I'll remember you." She stood and tightened the strap on her horse's saddle. "Don't remember me," she said softly. "Remember what it felt like to be alive out here. That's what matters." He rose to his feet, though his legs were still weak. The desert wind tugged at his torn shirt, carrying the smell of dust and sage. "You saved my life," he said. She gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe you saved mine too." They stood facing each other as the sun rose higher, the light turning everything gold again. For a moment, it seemed like the whole desert held its breath. Then she swung onto her horse, her movements smooth and certain. He watched as she turned toward the mountains, her silhouette framed by the morning light. She didn't look back, and he didn't call out. Some goodbyes didn't need words. The cowboy watched her ride until she became part of the horizon, another ghost on the endless trail. Then he looked down at the land around him, at the miles of dust and light stretching in every direction. It was harsh and empty, but in that emptiness he felt something new, a strange peace, quiet and deep. He saddled his own horse, wincing at the pull of his wound. Before leaving, he turned one last time to the direction she'd gone. No. The wind picked up, whispering through the rocks, carrying with it her last words, soft but clear in his mind. "No one should die alone under the same stars we all share." He smiled faintly, tipping his hat toward the horizon. Then he nudged his horse forward, the hooves clicking against the hard ground as he rode toward the far line of the desert. The day stretched before him, it's endless and bright, somewhere beyond. That life waited, maybe the same, maybe different, but his own. The land had taken much from him, but it had given something back too, a reason to keep moving, to live without fear of what the past held, as the sun climbed higher. He rode with his shadow long behind him, a lone figure cutting across the vast silence of the frontier. The air was dry, the road uncertain, but the weight in his chest felt lighter now. Somewhere behind him, a woman of the desert was riding too, her path her own, her spirit unbroken, and as the wind swept across the plains, it carried with it both. Their story's the tale of an Apache woman who refused to let the cowboy die alone, and a man who found redemption not through words or bullets, but through the quiet mercy of one who saw life where others only saw dust. The desert swallowed their tracks before noon, as it always did, keeping its secrets and its memories buried deep. Yet the sky above remained wide and endless, its light falling on all who dared to cross it, reminding those who wandered beneath it that every lost soul, no matter how far gone, could still find their way home.